Okay, good morning. Today's daf is daf Tzadik Hey 95 in Masechet Menachot. We are at Ibailahu. I believe it's 7 lines down. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. Yep, 7 lines down. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. So, we have been discussing, we just began discussing the Lechem Apanim yesterday, and along with the Shtei Alechem, and discussing exactly how they are prepared. I guess we began, yesterday was 94. So yeah, we began the 10th perek. I'm sorry, the 11th perek of Menachot, which began with a discussion of how they are prepared. And so we're continuing now our discussion of the Lechem Hapanim. And the Gemara begins today by raising an interesting question regarding what it means to leave the Mishkan. So let's take a look. Ibaylahu, 7 lines down. Lechem Hapanim nisol b'masos, where the lechem apanim, the showbread that was sitting on the shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash and in the Mishkan. Now we're referring to the Mishkan because we're talking about the traveling of the Jewish people in the wilderness. Was that lechem apanim invalidated as a result of the traveling? Because it's important to note. Or was it not? As Rashi tells us, last of the wide lines at the top of Rashi on Tzadik Hayam Aleph, end of the line. Nifsal b'masos kishenosin Yisrael b'midbar. When the Jewish people were traveling in the wilderness, umifrakim mishkan, and they took apart the Mishkan, v'nosim, and then they traveled. V'nosim hashulchan im alechem, and they traveled with the shulchan, with the table that was in the Kodesh area of the Mishkan, im alechem, and with the bread upon it, kediksiv that they should spread out a techeles garment over the table with the lechem upon him. Min nifsa lechem biyotze olo. Was the lechem invalidated as a result or not? Here's the basic idea, right? They took down the Mishkan. So you're no longer inside the Mishkan with this table. The table is instead covered. Is that table now outside the Mishkan? Or can we say, make a different kind of argument and say, hey, no, that table is where it's supposed to be. And when we say that something is invalidated when it leaves the Beis Hamikdash or the Mishkan, that's where it leaves where it's supposed to be. And so that's really fundamentally the question that we have here. And so we have Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi providing two potential conflicting answers. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Chad Amar Nifsal, V'chad Amar Eino Nifsal. One says that it's invalidated as a result of the traveling, and one says it's not invalidated. Manda Amar Nifsal, and now we're going to have three basic answers to this. One is our simple understanding, our first understanding. Then we're going to have Rav Dimi provide a second explanation. And then finally, Ravin is going to offer our third explanation. And we'll see that maybe there really isn't an argument here at all. But let's take a look at our first explanation. Manda Amar Nifsal, according to the one who says that it's invalid, Dixiv, Kasher Yachanu Ken Yiso, that as they are encamped, so are they going to journey? And what does that teach us? That teaches Ma b'chanayoso nifsal b'yotze. Just as when they are encamped, the bread would become invalidated if it left the Mishkan. Af b'nisiyaso nifsal b'yotze. So too, even when it's traveling, as soon as it leaves the Mishkan, it's going to be invalidated. Manda Amar Einu Nifsal, and the one who says that it's not invalidated, Tiksiv, V'lechem hatamid alav yeh. The lechem will be on it at all times. And what is the implication of that? Well, Rashi helps us out. V'lechem hatamid alav yeh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, eight, nine lines down in the Rashi. Let me make sure I got that right. Three, six, nine. Yep, 9 lines down in the Rashi. Alma, so we see the Kedusha Sekai. As long as it's on the table, it's going to remain valid. So as a result, that seems that would explain that position. So now the issue is, how does each of these two positions, one focuses on kasher yachanu ken yiso, the other focuses on velechem atamid alav yiyeh, how do they understand the other verse? The
How do they keep the bread from falling off the table when it moves? They
Because it's
tape it
covered.
down?
There's a covering over it.
No,
So
I
the cover.
understand that. But if you move the table, you haven't moved a table in your house and you have a box on it. Maybe it falls off. Did they tape the bread down? How they keep it in there?
No, no, I don't think they tape it down. I would say that if you, if you have people who are carrying it that can handle that weight, so then you're going to be okay. And so if you have, I don't remember whether this was carried by two people or four people. I mean, well, no, it would probably likely be carried by, well,
Four people, I think.
well,
They're
two
the
people or four
staffs.
people, I'm not sure. Because there was a staff on either side. So I can't remember whether the people would hold, one person would hold both staffs, one on each shoulder, or each staff end would be held by one shoulder. But in any event, the bottom line is that let's assume four people are holding it.
That's what I
So
think.
then it's going to be fine. You're not likely to have, and remember that Hashem is smoothing out the path for the Jewish people with the Ananea Kavod leading the way. So as a result, I would not expect that you would have much concern about things falling off. Look, if it was like a ball or something like that on the table, yeah, maybe it would fall off. But remember, there was not only the table, but there was the support system associated with the table. So you've got enough weight on the table that it should just stay on the table. Obviously, lighter things could more easily slide off, but I don't wouldn't think that this would slide off, especially since it, like I said, it'll be covered. So as a result, the cover will help keep everything on. V'idach nami. So now the question is, I don't. How do you deal with these other verses? V'idach nami haksiv kasher yachanu ken yiso. As they encamp, so are they going to journey. And so as a result, how do you deal with the understanding of that verse? That verse suggests that no matter where they are, if they leave the place, it's going to be puzzle. So le'idach gisa, we're going to explain it in the other direction. So have a seat. We're in the middle. So ma b'chaniya, so ki lo yatsa mimikoma lo mifsil afanisiya, so ki lo yatsa mimikomo lo mifsil. So we're going to explain it. That what does it mean? So they encamp, as they encamp, so they're going to journey. The point is that just as when they are encamped, the bread needs to just be in its right place, meaning on the we'll see, maybe not even on the table, but just somewhere in the general vicinity of where it's supposed to be, so it won't become invalidated. So too, when it journeys, as long as it doesn't leave its place, namely the table, it's not going to be invalidated. What about the verse, the bread's going to be on it always? Doesn't that show that it should that as long as the bread is on the table, it should all be valid because it's called the lechem. It's effectively called lechem even wherever it is. And so as a result, and lechem, as Rashi said, suggests that it still has the holiness associated with it. And so as a result, that's why we're going to abandon this first interpretation of the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and offer an alternative explanation. Ella kiyasa Rav Dimi Amar bimisudar. Not what they're arguing about. Bimisudar dekuli amalo pligi. When it comes to them being in the right order, and Rashi tells us bimisudar al hashulchan, that as long as it's on the table, nobody is going to disagree, and everybody is going to say that the lechem upon him remains kosher when it's on the table. Ela ki pligi. Where are they arguing? Bimisulak, when the bread has been removed from the table. Manda Amar Nifsal, the position that says that it's invalidated. Dixiv Kasher Yachanu Ken Yiso, that as the one who says that it's as they encamp, so will they journey, so will they travel. So Mabachanaya, so Nifsal Bayotze, just as when they are encamped, it becomes invalidated if it leaves the courtyard. Benisiato Mifsal Bayotze, so too, as long as if it leaves the table, and so then it's going to also be invalidated when it leaves the courtyard. And of course, by traveling, it will have left the courtyard. And Lamanda Amar Eino Nifsal, and according to the view that it is not invalidated, Dixiv Vinasa Oel Moed. Well, now we'll cite a different verse that the Oel Moed will journey. So what's the implication of the fact that the Oel Moed is journeying? Well, it implies Afal Pisha Nasa Oel Moedhu. Even when it journeys, it's still an Oel Moed. So now the Gemara asks, V'idach nami haksiv kasher yachanu yiso, just as when it encamps, it's going to journey. So le'idach kisa, again, we're going to explain it in the other direction. It's not saying that it's going to be invalidated. It's proving that it's going to be validated. Ma b'chaniya, so ki lo mapik le lo mifsal, as just as when it's encamped, as long as you don't formally leave the courtyard, you're going to still be valid. So, kilo mapik lo mifsal. Just as so too, when it's journeying, as long as it's in the right general area, it's not going to be invalidated. And Rashi helps us understand what is the right area. Kilo mapik le. This is Rashi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 lines down in the narrow lines. Kilo mapik le. Ma'azara. That when it's the Mishkan is standing, so then it means that it doesn't leave the courtyard. Bahashtanami, and so too now when it is traveling, lo apkim. It means that it's as long as it stays in the Levite camp, it should be valid. So ve'idach nami hoksiv v'nasa oel moed. Well, 1 second, according to the viewpoint that says that it should be kosher because v'nasa oel moed means that as long as it's even when it's traveling, it remains an oel moed. How does the person who says that it's invalid understand that verse? That verse seems to suggest that even when it's traveling, it's going to be an oel moed. That's for telling us where the Mishkan should travel when it is traveling with the various banners. And so as a result, with the flags of all of the tribes. So it's telling us that, of course, the Mishkan needs to travel in the middle, just as it sits in the middle of the encampment when they are encamped.
All the tribes have to move in order. They can't step out of order. They have to go in the
Correct. That's exactly, and that's what we're going to do. That's what the opinion that says that it's invalid is going to do with the verse "V'nasa ohel moed." Well, 1 second, according to the one who uses that line "V'nasa ohel moed" to tell us that as long as even when the ohel moed is traveling, it's still an ohel moed, and therefore that the bread is going to be valid. How do they know how we're supposed to travel? That you learn from the rest of that verse. This is the language of Nasa o Moed is from the verse Bamidbar Perek Bet Pasuk Yud Zayin, and so as a result, the end of that verse, or later on in that verse, it says Machaneh Levim b'tocha machanot. Right? So the next words in that verse, the first words are B'nasa o Moed, and the next words are Machaneh Levim b'tocha machanot. And so that's how we will know Nafka. That's how we know that in fact the Levite camp and the Mishkan needs to be traveling in the middle. So Meisvei, I'm going to ask you a question on this interpretation because Bishas Siluk Masaos, when everything was journeying, Kodshim Nifsalim Biyotse, the sanctified items in the Beis Hamikdash meaning the sacrifices, Nifsalim Biyotse, they became invalidated as a result of leaving the right place. V'zavin, and now we are going. That's the piece that's going to, of course, be relevant for us. But we're going to continue with the rest of the brisa. V'zavin hamitzorain mishtachin chutz lemechitzasan, and both those who are zav and a mitzora would have to leave the areas that are relevant to them. So my lav afilu lechem hapanim, doesn't the implication here mean that even the lechem hapanim became invalid as a result of leaving when the Jewish people were journeying? So, and we'll take a look at Rashi. Kodshim nifsalin biyotze. This is now 3, 6, still closer to the top. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, about 20 lines down. She'ein lahem kloyim, because there are no longer curtains around them. And so as a result, the fact that the curtains have left the Mishkan because they've been taken down, so therefore they are going to be invalidated. And now, what does this have to do with the Zavim and the Mitzoraim? The Afal Pikain, even though there is no central location, there is no Mishkan where, for example, a Tameh mate would not be allowed to go. Hamachane Kadosh, the camp, while it is traveling, remains in its state of holiness. And therefore, v'zavin umitzorain mishtachin. Those who are a zav, the men or women who have some kind of abnormal flow, or a mitzora, somebody, which is, I guess, a nice daf yomi coincidence, because this week's parsha is Tazria mitzora, mishtachin chutz mimechitzosan. You have to send them out of their appropriate place. Mitzora chutz l'machane Yisrael. A mitzora goes outside all three camps, so even the Israelite camp, they have to be outside. V'hayu mahalchim b'sof machaneh, and so they travel at the very end of the camp, meaning after the last of the tribes. Keda'amar b'brachot, as we see on brachot, daf nun daled amud aleph, ad v'ha b'sofa, v'zavin, and when it comes to to those who are have the tuma of zav, schutz l'machane leviyah, they have to be outside the Levite camp. So that isn't that. So in any event, the bottom line is back into the Gemara. My lava fiu lechem upon him isn't the implication of what is the sacrificial offerings that became invalidated, including the lechem upon him. So not pretty much the obvious answer. Lo bar mi lechem upon him. We could say that brisa is talking about everything except for the lechem upon him. All right, you tried to give the obvious answer, but it doesn't work. Manafshach. Because how are we understanding the concept of Vinasa Ohel Moed? Are we saying that the Ohel Moed is journeying and it is really an Ohel Moed? Well, then, Ohel Moed Dafkahu, Afal Gaftahu Glulu Haparochas Kedekatani Lael, that even though you've rolled up the curtains, as we learned above, that even though it's going to still be treated as if it's an Ohel Moed. Well, then afilu kachim nami, even sacrificial offerings, as long as they remain in the Levite camp, they should still be valid. And Ohel Moed lav dafka, and if the Ohel Moed is not meant to be precise, afilu lechem hapanim nami, even the lechem hapanim should be invalidated. Meaning, if we're going to treat the Ohel Moed as if it truly is standing, well, then everything should be kosher. And if we're treating the Ohel Moed as if it's not standing, well, then everything should be puzzle. So how do you understand this? And so as a result, we end up rejecting the second approach of Rav Dimi. And now we come to the third approach of Ravin.
I was saying there in this interpretation, I'm not even sure which one. I think the one where it's not standing, where it's we consider it not standing. Have we obliterated the boundaries between the machanot?
What according to the brisa that we just saw, we see that the boundaries still matter. We just no longer have the center of our encampment, which is the sort of machaneh kuhuna. So
Right.
it seems like everybody is agreeing is missing. Now, it could be that that's part of the argument. Do we say that the OL Moed is dafka and that therefore the Machane Kahuna still exists to some degree? Or do we say no, it doesn't exist at all because it's completely taken apart? But the bottom line is that it's one of those two things, and we should not. You can't make the argument, right? Our answer to this brisa was to differentiate between some other sacrificial offerings and the lechem upon him. But there is no basis to make that distinction. And so as a result, that's why we have to reject this second approach. And we now say, no, there's got to be a third approach. And
But the
now we
lechem apanim are not kudshim, though. It's right.
no, they are kachim. They can only be eaten by kohanim, and they are invalidated if they leave the azara. So
But,
no, they're
but we're not
absolutely
saying they're karbanot, kudshim.
no, they're not karbanot, but that we didn't say karbanot. We said
Right.
kachim. So
So they're
they're
kudshim,
yeah,
kudshim.
they're yes. I think that they're kachim. Then and the question, of course, is of what sanctified them. That was some of the discussion that we had yesterday. Eliki also Ravin Amar b'Mesudar Umar Amar b'Mesulach Velo pligi. Really, they aren't arguing. And the one who says that it was kosher and that the bread remains valid is talking about where the bread remains on the table. And the one who says that it's invalid is where if the bread was removed from the table. And they weren't arguing at all. That basically the idea is that when it says V'lechem hatamid alav yihiyeh, it's telling us that as long as the bread is on the table, even when it's traveling, it's going to be valid.
So it
And
doesn't
when it
matter if there's a separation between the machnekuna and levia. Then
Correct. It doesn't matter if the curtains go away, we're still going to treat it as if it's still kosher because it is in its proper place. And so as a result, now we can understand this brisa. So if somehow the sacrifices were either on the Mizbeach or something along those lines, so then that might still be fine, even if you're moving the Mizbeach. But here you're talking about what we're really talking about is the animals, the edible part of the animals that belong to the Kohanim. Now, with nothing around it any longer, there's nothing to differentiate the area of the Kohanim from the rest of it, and so those sacrificial offerings will become invalidated. But as long as the bread, yes, it's no longer in the curtains, but the bread remains on the table, and that is a proper place for it. Therefore, the bread will stay kosher. But when it comes to the bread that's no longer on the table, everybody would agree that it becomes invalidated. And so when it comes to the question of EOL Moed Dafkahu or Lav Dafka, the answer is that we are understanding it as Lav Dafka.
right.
It is not actually standing, and as a result, that's why everything will become invalidated. And so Tosfos here asks, you may remember a discussion in Zvachim that suggests that the Kohanim were still able to eat the even after the Mizbeach was taken down. And Tosfos answers here that really that's dealing with a situation where the curtains remain standing. And so as long as you have the curtains around the Mishkan, well, then the Kohanim can continue to eat even while the Mishkan is being taken down. But once those curtains go away, well, then as a result, then there's nothing left. Then they are not able to eat anything. The whatever kudshim remains would become invalidated.
But the lechem apanim is still valid, right?
The lechem apanim remains valid because as long as it remains on the table, as long as it remains on the table. Okay, so
That's
now
eaten. Is that eaten? I forget.
the lechem apanim is absolutely eaten.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely eaten. It's going to be taken down on Shabbos
Right. And
afternoon
eaten.
and given to the Kohanim. Amar
Now, if
Abaye.
it should fall off the table, while they're traveling? It becomes invalid, or can they just
That's
put it back
correct. It
on the
would no,
table?
no, it would become invalid. That's the final conclusion. So we need to make sure that the people who are carrying the table are very careful that they remain, they take steps in lockstep so that as a result the table remains balanced at all times. They would want to make sure that the four people are roughly the same height. This, of course, assumes that the what we say about the Aron is not true for the Shulchan, right? We say with respect to the Aron that the Aron carried its carriers, whereas I don't think we say that for the Shulchan. So as a result, the Shulchan, you'd want to make sure that everybody's roughly the same height. Amar Abaye. So now we're going to say we just saw that in fact that the sacrificial food is going to become invalidated while traveling if they take everything down and begin traveling. So Amar Abaye says, you know what that shows? Shmamina yesh siluk masos balayla. That in fact it could be possible to journey in the middle of the night. Because if you tell me that they would never begin a journey at night, Amos midale. Well, then as soon as why are you telling me about they could use you, Mark?
Okay.
Why are you telling me about the removal of the curtains? Litzafra, my area mishum yotze, tepukle, see you later, tepukle, the ipsil le benina. Instead of focusing, when the curtains get taken down about the fact that you're leaving the Beis Hamikdash, leaving the Azara, leaving the courtyard, leaving the Mishkan. Here we can say that you're actually, when you wait until the next morning to travel, all of the food is going to be invalidated because it stayed overnight. And it's important. Maybe you'll say, well, we're talking about not all of the food. You're right, not all of it. Any shlomim would not be. But any food that is required to be eaten in the courtyard is food that only gets eaten for a day and a night. And so as soon as the next morning were to come, you would have a problem. And so as a result, this shows that in fact, as long if the Ananei HaKavod were to lift off of the Mishkan, indicating that the Jewish people needed to travel, well, then if it happened at night, they would need to travel at night. It would not be such that they would wait for the next morning. Pshita, that's obvious. After all, the Torah tells us back in Shemot, Perek, Yud Gimel, Pasuk, Kaf Aleph, Lalechas Yomam V'Layla Ksiv, that when it came to the pillars of fire and smoke that was in front of the Jewish people, that it helped them journey in the daytime and in the nighttime. So of course they journeyed at night. No, not necessarily. That doesn't mean that necessarily they started at night. Maybe they always would start during the day. But when they didn't start during the day, they wouldn't start their journey at night. Kamash Malan. That's why Abaye tells us that in fact it had to be that they would travel and they would begin their travels even at night. Or Minhu, 1 second. We quoted a brisa a few moments ago that said that the Zavim and the Mitzoraim were sent out even of their areas, even when the Jewish people were journeying. But listen to the following brisa. Huglulu haparoches, when they rolled up the curtain, hutru hazavin umitzoraim likanes l'sham. The Zavin and the Mitzoraim were able to enter the area. They could go wherever they wanted. Doesn't that completely contradicts what we saw just a few moments ago? So Amar Rav Ashi, lo kasha, ha Rabbi Eliezer, ha Rabbanan. Where it's permitted, that's Rabbi Eliezer. And where it's not permitted, where they still have to remain in their various areas, that's the rabbis. Detanya, as we have a brisa that says the following. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, as we turn to Tzadik Hayam a bet, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yachol Dachaku, Zavin Umitzorain, V'nichnasu la'azara b'pesach haba b'tuma. I might have thought that if a Zav or a Mitzora, if they came and they pushed and they entered the courtyard on Pesach when the Pesach is Haba B'Tuma, is being brought in a state of Tuma. And Rashi tells us, we go back, turn back to Tzadik Dalet, Tzadik Hey Amud Aleph, last Rashi on the page. But Pesach Haba B'Tuma, Kagon Shirov Tzibur Tameim. If
Right,
most of
right.
the community is Tameh,
Hutra. Hutra.
exactly, exactly. We're going to say Tuma, Hutra, Tuma
Tuma.
Tzibor,
Hutra.
Hutra, Tuma Tzibor. So, Kida Amar, as we saw back in Psachim, Ish Nidche, Pesach Sheni, a single individual is going to be pushed off to come for Pesach Sheni, below Tzibor, but not the community. The Tumas Mate, Hutra Lahem. Tumas Mace is Hutra B'Tzibor, that we will allow the community. So in that case, back on to the Gemara, we'll pause that Rashi right there. We'll probably just leave it at there. The end of the Rashi deals with the proof that we're about to bring, but I think we can do that more effectively outside. So back on to Tzadik Heyam Bet. End of the second line, Yachol Yehu Chayavin. I might have thought that they should be liable for kares, for having entered the courtyard when everybody is able to enter the courtyard in a state of tuma. After all, tumas mace is a less restrictive kind of tuma than either zav or mitzora, whereas tumas mace can go into certain areas of the temple. They can't just go into the courtyard, but a zav can't go into any of the Temple Mount at all, and a mitzora has to be outside the entire city. So those, maybe you would think that they should also be liable to kares because their strictures on, after all, even though tuma is no longer relevant because the entire community is tameh, maybe we would say that the strictures of the zav and a mitzora go away. Remain, and therefore they would be liable for kares. So Talmud Lomar v'yishlechu min hamachaneh kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tamei lenefesh, that you have to send out of the camp and out of the relevant camp everyone who has tzaras, everyone who's a zav, and everyone who is tamei mace. So by having those three categories juxtaposed against one another, it teaches the following: B'shah mesim mishtalchin, zavin umitzorin mishtalchin. That when we throw out the tamei mate and send out the tamei mate from the Beis Hamikdash or from the Mishkan, so too we'll tell the Zavin and the Mitzoraim that they also have to go out. However, Ein Tmei Mason Mishtalchin, when those who are Tamei Mate are not sent out, Ein Zavin Mitzorin Mishtalchin. Well, then the Zavin and the Mitzorin are not sent out. And that's consistent with the second brisa that we just saw, right? The brisa said that when the Jewish people were traveling, the Zavin and the Mitzorin could enter anywhere they wanted. Well, that makes total sense. Of course they could enter anywhere they wanted because there was no throwing out any longer. There was no sending out any longer of those who were Tamei Mace. And
why not? Why
because
not?
there was no camp where the Tamei Mace would not be allowed to be. The whole Machane Kahuna effectively disappeared when they were traveling because the curtains were gone.
When it was obliterated.
Exactly. The curtains were taken down, and so there was no place for the Mason, that the Mason had to be thrown out. And so what Rebbe Eliezer is saying is, the only time we have the restrictions on a Mitzora and a Zav are when we also have restrictions on a Tamei Mace. And
that seems like a forced argument, though, because what does one necessary? I could see, but
well, the argument is based on the pasuk. Again, the pasuk is Perek Hey pasuk Bet in Bamidbar, where it combines and juxtaposes the Mitzor, the Zav, and those who are Tamei Mace. And so, as a result, all three have similar applicable rules. When one applies, all three apply. When any one of them doesn't apply, the others don't apply. And specifically, the one that is likely not to apply is the one who's Tamei Mace. And so just as on Pesach, if we're bringing the Karban Pesach in a state of tumah. So as a result, a mitzora or a zav who comes is not going to get punished. So too, when we don't apply tumas mace in the midbar, when the Jewish people are traveling, the mitzora and the zav are also not going to be punished if they go into the wrong area. They're going to be allowed in any area that they want. And of course, the rabbis will disagree, and the rabbis say
But
no.
it still seems like a forced argument. For instance, if there is nobody, for instance, if there are no, God, I mean, there are no deaths in the community. There is no one is Tamei made, but a person could still be a Metzorah. So then he would have to leave that camp, or he could be a Zav.
Right, but the
So
rules, the difference is that the rule still applies. If the rule doesn't apply, that's when, but the rule still applies even if there's no tummy mace. Somebody who's tummy mace needs to be go out of the camp. There may not be an application of the rule, but the rule still applies. That's what's different about that situation and the situation on Pesach and the situation in the Mishkan when the Jewish people were traveling in the wilderness. When there's no Mishkan, or when the majority of people are tummy mace, and there's no application of the rule of a tummy mace can't enter the Beis Hamikdash because we're talking about for Pesach. Well, in both of those situations, that rule doesn't apply at all, and therefore we're not going to do. Now, if you don't like that juxtaposition and say, "Hey, no," I would say that it still does apply. It's just not relevant. Well, that's what the rabbis say. The rabbis disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, and they say that even when the kalayim are no longer, the curtains are no longer standing for the Mishkan, we're still going to apply the rule. Okay, so let's go on with the next Mishnah, and the next Mishnah continues our discussion of the Shtei Alechem and the Lechem Apanim. Acha Shtei Alechem v'Lachas Lechem Apanim, both with respect to the Shtei Alechem and the Lechem Apanim, Lisha San Ba'aricha San B'chutz. The Tanakama says that they could be kneaded and they could be organized. In this case, we understand this to mean shaped outside the Beis Hamikdash, outside the courtyard, Va'afiyasan Bifnim. But they have to be baked inside the courtyard. So that's opinion number one. Ve'enon dochas es haShabbos, and they do not override Shabbos, meaning that you have to do it before Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer kol ma'aseh bifnim. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's not that you can't do the kneading and the shaping outside the azara. You need to do that even inside the azara. That too has to be, and of course the baking needs to be inside. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says no. La'olam heavy ragel Omer, you should always be regular saying shtei alechem v'lechem apanim, ksheris ba'azara, ksheris b'veis habagi. You could do whatever you want. You could do the baking, you could do the shaping, you could do the kneading, inside or outside. It's kosher both in the Azara and Beis Pagi, meaning all of Yerushalayim. Okay, so in fact, take a look at the last Rashi on the Mishnah. Again, we're on Sadik Hamabet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines down. Uksheres beves pagi, but call Yerushalayim to kasavar afia and san nami b'chutz, because he says that even the baking can be outside of the Azara. Okay, so now the Gemara now points out an apparent inconsistency within the first opinion, within the opinion of the Tanakama, right? The Tanakama says you can knead it outside the courtyard. You have to bake it inside the courtyard. And we'll see also that he says that it's not Docha Shabbos. So, Haguva Kashya. Amrat lisha san ba'aricha san b'chutz. You say that it needs to be kneaded, that it can be kneaded and formed outside of the Zara. Alma midas yavesh lonis kadsha. That shows that the dry measurement utensils are not sanctified and do not cause the consecration of their contents. Va'afiyasan bifnim, but they can be baked inside. Alma midas yavesh niskadsha. So in second, if they have to be baked inside, that implies that they are already sanctified, and so as a result, doesn't that show that the measuring utensils do cause consecration of the dough associate and the flour associated with the shtei lechem and the lechem upon him. So Amar Rava, the Shita Mekubetzes changes this to Rava because we're going to see that it's Rava who's going to make the exact same statement in a few moments. Huksha Adam Kasha Shehu Kasha Kabarzel, that this question was a hard one and it was found to be hard by somebody who is hard as iron. Umanu, and who is that? Rav Sheshis. It's Rav Sheshis. So 1 second, my kasha. How can you say that this is a difficult question? Dilma isaron lo makadish, tanor magadish. Maybe the dry vessel of the isaron that we saw right in the last parak, which dealt with all of the different vessels, that vessel is not going to consecrate its contents, but the tanur, the oven, does consecrate its contents. So you don't have to say there's any contradiction. It's not because the contents of the oven were already consecrated that you need to do the baking inside the azara, but rather it's because when you put it in the oven, that's what's going to consecrate the contents. And so therefore it needs to be in the azara. No, so let's revise what our question is. Va'afiyasan bifnim. We said that the baking need to be inside. Alma tornor mikadosh. So we see that the oven causes the loaves to be consecrated. But yet, we then said, the Tanakama, ve'ein dochos es Shabbos. It doesn't cause the prohibitions of Shabbos to be overridden. So 1 second, why, if it doesn't cause the prohibitions of Shabbos to be overridden, that means you are baking the bread on Friday. It has become holy on Friday. And now, when do you put it onto the table? Well, you wake up on Shabbos morning, and on Shabbos afternoon, you're going to replace the bread that's there from last week and put on the bread from this week. But ipasla belina, the bread should be invalidated as a result of staying overnight, as Rashi tells us. It's right opposite.
Where do we learn that applies to bread? We learn that applies to korban.
Yes, but let's take a look at Rashi, right? Because we saw because it applies to all menachot, and this is considered part of the mincha family. So ipaslu belina, right opposite the last line in the Mishnah in the Gemara, that Rashi, there's a Rashi right there. Ipaslu belina, the kol hamenachos, every mincha offering, mishin niskadshu, when it becomes sanctified, bikli, in a vessel, nifsalin, it will become invalidated as a result of staying overnight. V'hai, and here this lechem apanim, or the shtei lechem, kevan de ikdish me'etmol, because it was sanctified the prior day, and this is really talking about the lechem apanim, not the shtei lechem. Since it was sanctified the prior day, batanur, in that oven, ifsil belina, kodem sheyisadrenu ala shulchan. It ends up becoming puzzle as a result of staying overnight before you have a time to put it on the table. So,
but it rests for a week. Isn't that overnight?
That is true. That is true. But then it's you've already effectively offered it, and the Torah tells us it's supposed to be there for a week. So the problem isn't you're right that it can last beyond the day, but it has to get onto the shulchan. The shulchan, the placement on the shulchan is effectively its service. And so as a result, that's the problem, is that you're not doing the service. Now, your thought, which is, of course, it is okay for this to be overnight, is in fact how the Rambam paskins, even though the Gemara will end up saying that this is a difficulty. But let's take a look. Give me a little wiggle room and a patience, and we will get there very shortly.
I just thought of the question. I mean, it came to me.
No, I understand completely. I'm just saying you're being mechaven to the Rambam. So Amar Rava, so Rava says, Huksha Adam Kasher Shehu Kasher Kabarzel. So this question was found very difficult by somebody who's hard as iron. Umanu Rav Sheshis, and that's Rav Sheshis. So that's where the statement happened. So Amar Rav Ashi, my Kusha. Rav Ashi says, I don't understand the question. Dilma my b'mifnim. Maybe when we say that the baking and has to happen inside, it doesn't mean inside the azara, and therefore the oven is sanctifying the contents, and therefore we have to worry about lina, but rather b'mekom's reason. We're talking about a place where people are very careful because when it comes to the lechem apanim, we have to ensure that it doesn't become chametz. So v'hada Rav Ashi berusahi, but the opinion of Rav Ashi is actually outside our tradition. It is not accepted because, after all, the following manafshach. Reason, if in fact you're going to tell me that the baking requires people who are diligent, lisha va'aricha nami beinan's reason. Well, then the kneading and the organizing and the shaping need to also have somebody who's careful. The lisha va'aricha lo beinan's reason, and if you don't need people who are careful for the kneading and shaping, afia nami lo beinan's reason. Well, then you don't need it for the baking. So Ella the Rav Ashi Brusahi. So it must be that Rav Ashi's answer is outside. And Tosos explains, and therefore Ella the Rav Ashi Brusahi, Vitivra. And we have to separate the two statements and break the two statements that opened our Mishnah. Misha shanazu, lo shanazu. That the position that says that you can't, that it's not done on Shabbos is different from the position that says that you have to bake it inside the Kodesh, inside the, I'm sorry, not inside the Kodesh, inside the Azara. And so inside the courtyard. And so those two opinions are different because according to the one who says that you bake it inside, it becomes sanctified. And therefore, when does it have to happen? It has to happen on Shabbos. And that way, you don't have to worry about Lina. And according to the one who says that Shabbos is a problem, he would say, yeah, Shabbos is a problem, but you can do everything outside the Beis Hamikdash and nothing sanctifies, and you don't have to worry about anything because when does the bread get sanctified? When you put it on the table. And so that only happens on Shabbos, and so therefore there's no Lina issue. And so that's how Tosos explains it. The problem is the Rambam ends up paskening like both of those opinions of the Tanakama, namely that the baking has to happen inside the Azara, and you can't, and it's not Docha Shabbos. So as a result, you have to effectively say something along the lines of what Ken was saying just a few moments ago, that in fact, there cannot be an issue of Lina, even though ordinarily you would say, of course, there's got to be an issue of Lina with respect to the Lechem Apanim. We would say that there is not. How come and exactly how, that is beyond our topic for today. But the point is that you have to say something along those lines. So let's continue. We'll try and get to...
Why can't it be Docha Shabbat? The korbanot are offered 7 days a week, right?
The korbanot are offered, but this is
but this is like a korban. You said before the Menachot are
absolutely. And so that is why some people say that you are allowed to do it on Shabbos, but our Tanakama says that you're not. The Tanakama says that the part that is like a sacrifice is putting it on the altar, not the baking. And so as a result, only the things that the question is what the question always is, this is, what has to be done on Shabbos and what doesn't have to be done on Shabbos. And we generally say that in the Mikdash, what doesn't have to be done on Shabbos must be done before Shabbos. And so as a result, because the baking doesn't have to be done on Shabbos, certainly according to the viewpoint that says that the measuring utensils and the oven are not mekadesh, well then you can do them before Shabbos, and then you bring it into the Azara and put it on the shulchan on Shabbos, and that is what sanctifies it. So, all right. So now we had two other opinions in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda said that everything needs to be done inside the courtyard, and Rabbi Shimon says that nothing needs to be done inside the courtyard. So the Gemara provides the basis for these two viewpoints. So Rabbi Yehuda Amar Kol Ma'asem Bifnim V'chulu. So the bottom line is we're going to explain both positions. Amar Rabbi Abahu Bar Kahana Ushneim Mikra Echad Darshu. Both of them are really learning from one verse. V'hu Derech Chol V'af Ki Hayom Yikdash Bekeli. So this is a verse. Actually, if today is Erev Rosh Chodesh, if today were Shabbos, this would be immediately following the Haftorah for a Shabbos Erev Rosh Chodesh. Right after David HaMelech leaves Yehonatan after doing the whole bit with the arrows, so he goes to Nov and he asks for bread. And the Kohen says to David, listen, I can't give you bread. Everything is holy. And this is David's response. Now, the more traditional understanding is look, I'm on a mission. I'm on a non-holy mission. That's Vahu Derechol, that I'm on a non-holy mission. But Avki Hayom Yikdash Bekeli. And so even the things that are consecrated today, fine, you can give them. You should be able to give them to me. But the Gemara is going to interpret this as being all about the comment on the Kohen saying, listen, I can't give you any bread because all the bread that I've got is lechem apanim. So Rabbi Yehuda savar bechol ashkechinhu deka'afulei. So Rabbi Yehuda says, you know what was happening in this verse? David HaMelech came on a weekday and he sees that the Kohanim are, and namely specifically on Friday, and he sees that the Kohanim are baking the lechem apanim on Friday. Amar lahu, and he says to them, Derechol ka'afisule. Once again, are you baking them on Friday because this needs to happen on a weekday? Avki ayom yikdash bekeli. And that's because you think that today it will be consecrated, but then that's a problem because today it will be consecrated in a vessel, meaning you're going to end up baking it in the oven, causing it to be holy. Ipsole belina, and it's going to be now non-kosher as a result of it staying over till tomorrow. So that's how Rabbi Yehuda would understand it. And therefore, that's why Rabbi Yehuda says, look, you have to do it in the in the Azara because the service vessels are holy and will sanctify the bread, and you have to violate Shabbos. You have to do it even on Shabbos. It's part of the sanctified things you do. It's part of the sacrificial part, and therefore you can do it on Shabbos. And what David HaMelech is saying is, look, you're doing this wrong. You need to be doing this on Shabbos, not today. And Rabbi Shimon savar b'Shabbos gashachinu deka'afu. And Rabbi Shimon said, no, it's the exact opposite. He found him doing it on Shabbos. And Amar lahu lo derechol be'isum l'meh day. 1 second, shouldn't you be doing this in a way that is not on Shabbos, meaning that you should be doing it yesterday? Midi tanur makadesh. Do you think that it has to be done today because the oven is sanctifying the bread and therefore you'd have an issue of lina? No, shulchan hu to makadesh. It is the table that of the Mishkan that consecrates the bread. So that's how we potentially could understand this verse in two different ways. One completely consistent with Rabbi Yehuda's position that everything needs to be done in the Azara, and one with respect to Rabbi Shimon, who says that everything can be done anywhere. So umimatzis amra to bishas afiyak ashkechenu. 1 second though, that your entire interpretation doesn't work, because can you imagine that that David was finding him already in the process of baking? V'haksiv, the specific pasuk says, this is the previous pasuk, I believe. Let me just double check. Oh no, this is the next pasuk. The next pasuk says, "Vayitin lo hakohen kodesh ki lo hayasham lechem ki im lechem apanim hamusarim lifnei Hashem." That he's giving him the bread that already that was the holy bread from the shulchan, and so as a result, he's giving him the bread. That means that it had to have happened on Shabbos, because only on Shabbos is the bread removed from the shulchan. So it has to be that the baking already happened because the new bread has already replaced the old bread because the old bread because the new bread needs to already exist when you remove the old bread. And so the old bread, which is the legam upon him and is sanctified, so only Kohanim are supposed to eat it, and we'll get to that issue in a moment, it must be that the baking already happened. So
So
as a
the baking
result,
happened on Friday. That's
well,
what we're
it could
saying.
have happened on Friday or it could have happened earlier on Shabbos, depending on which opinion you hold. So Elamai,
So then it's a Makadish. So if it happened, wait, so
according to
what makes it
Rebbe
Makadish then? According to either the Tanur or is it or does everyone hold it's not the Tanur?
No, the debate continues. I mean, the debate is still the debate. Meaning, according to Rebbe Yehuda, it's going to focus on. Sorry for not scrolling. According to Rebbe Yehuda, we're going to focus. Everything needs to be done in the courtyard because the various utensils are sanctifying the bread, and therefore it has to happen on Shabbos because we have the issue of lina. And Rabbi Shimon says no, nothing has to happen in the courtyard because the bread is not going to be sanctified until it gets onto the shulchan, and therefore you could do it before Shabbos. So that's the fundamental disagreement between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. It relates both to Shabbos and to the location. And even those who are asking the question on Rabbi Abahu Bar Kahana's explanation are going to agree with the bottom line of the machlokes. But now we have to give. But the problem is that the context of the verse makes it clear that the baking has already happened. So he could not possibly have found them in the process of baking. Rather, it must have been after the bread was already switched out. And so here's what David was saying.
But we don't know when the baking took place yet.
And we don't know when the baking took place, so we don't have a proof either for either to Rebbe Yehuda or to Rebbe Shimon. Exactly. Elamai derechol de ka'amr lahu. So what was this derechol that was done, that non-sacred or non-holy thing that was done? Hachi ka'amrulei. This is what they were telling to him first. Leika lechem ki im lechem apanim hamasurim lifnei Hashem. The only bread we've got is the lechem apanim that was removed from before Hashem. So that's supposed to go to all of the Kohanim. Amar lahu, and he said to them, you know what? Lo mi bayhai. That's fine. I could take that bread. And not only that, not only could I take that bread, the kaven denafik le meila derecholhu. Well, it's no longer subject to meila because the Kohanim have the ability to eat it. So as a result, once the Kohanim have the ability to eat something, it's not subject to meila, and therefore that there's no meila question. The only issue is my eating something that is kodesh. Ela afilu heichnamik. But you know what? I can even ask you to give me the bread off the shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Mishkan. The Hayom Yikdash Bekeli, that became consecrated today. Because either whether you hold like Rabbi Yehuda, that it became consecrated when you baked it today, or and because he says you violate Shabbos, or you baked it yesterday, but it became holy today when you put it on the shulchan, that's still fine. Havule delecho, you could still give it to me to eat as we turn to Tzadik Vav Amud Aleph. Mesukanhu, because this is speaking to about David in the third party, right? This is a dangerous situation. I have not eaten for a couple of days. I need to be able to eat.
Why isn't it Meila? It belongs to the Kohanim.
It would be Meila, but we violate Meila no, it's not Meila because what belongs to the Kohanim already is not Meila because it belongs to the Kohanim. Meila is only something that belongs to Hashem. Taking it off the Shulchan would be Meila, but even that would be okay because David is in mortal danger. And so Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, the Gemara pligi. And okay, so as a result, we've now explained David's words to the Kohen, but now we have to explain what's the basis of the argument. So what they're arguing about is about tradition. As Rashi tells us, the Gemara pligi, third line on Sadik Vav Amud Aleph, Mar Gamir Le Mirabbe. This Rabbi Yehuda learned it from his teacher, the Tanner Makadesh. He learned that the oven sanctifies, and therefore you have to violate Shabbos so that you don't have an issue of lina. Umar Gomer Lo Delo Makadesh. And the other, Rabbi Shimon, said it doesn't sanctify, and therefore you don't have to do it on Shabbos, you could do it before Shabbos.
And there's
And
no Lena problem,
and
according to
there's no
him.
Lena problem. Exactly. And Daikanami. And you know what? Take a look at the wording of our Mishnah, and you could see that that is in fact the case. Dikatani. Because what did Rabbi Shimon specifically say? Rabbi Shimon Omer, La'olam heavy ragel Omer. These are the key words. You should always be accustomed to say. Now, shtei alechem v'lechem apanim b'ksheres ba'azara b'ksheres base pagi. That you can do the lechem apanim anywhere, whether it's in the courtyard, outside the courtyard, anywhere in Yerushalayim, according to Rashi. So, and what's key about that? Why did he use the language of la'olam heavy rag galomer? One should always be accustomed to say. The point is, daikanami. Take a look at the next Rashi, last line of the wide lines at the top of Rashi. The Gemara pligi. They are arguing in the tradition to below Bekrai, and not in a pasuk, and not understanding a pasuk. Midinakat high lishna, by using this language of la'olam habi regalomer. The point is that there is no argument. The only basis to say what I said is because I have a tradition along those lines. And therefore, you have to become accustomed to saying it. And similarly, Rabbi Yehuda would say the same thing, Shema Mina. And so as a result, that is in fact the case. And what's interesting again is that notwithstanding this discussion of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, the Rambam ends up paskening like the Tanakama of having to bake it inside and and you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. So again, we're going to pick up with the next Mishnah, God willing, tomorrow.
You bake
Looking
it
forward.
inside?
You
I
bake it
thought
inside.
I thought we
Yeah.
said the Rambam holds that you can bake it outside and there's no Lena.
No, 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 no. No, the Rambam holds exactly what the Tanakhama said. The Tanakhama said you can do the kneading outside and the shaping outside, but you have to do the baking inside. And the Tanakhama said that that you don't violate Shabbos for it. So you have to do it on Friday. That's what makes the Rambam so difficult, right? The Rambam doesn't seem to be consistent between these two concepts of Lina and Shabbos. Whereas both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon are very consistent, and yet nonetheless the Rambam, because presumably the Tanakhama is the rabbis, holds like the Tanakhama. So just very, very interesting the fact that even though the Tosfos said that as a result of the questions that we asked, we have to say that the position of having to bake it inside the Azara is held by somebody different from the person who says that you don't do it on Shabbos. So very, very difficult. But again, you highlighted that there is an aspect of the lechem apanim that is by definition multiple days. You're supposed to leave it there all week. So as a result, one could argue that maybe this is just different. It is not like every other sacrifice. And yes, every other sacrifice has an issue of lina, but this sacrifice does not, because it's not truly a sacrifice. So again, very interesting
So if the
issue.
Rambam holds that you do it on, then there's no issue of Lena with him, right? I thought
No, he says you don't do it on Shabbos.
Oh, I thought you just said well,
No, I said he holds exactly what the Tanakhama says. The Tanakhama says that you have to do the baking in the oven in the Azara, and you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos.
Right, so you do it in the Azara, and there's no question of Lena, according to the Rambam.
No, because you have to do it on Friday. So of
Right.
course there. But if the reason that you do it in the Azara is because the oven is presumably Mekadesh. So now you have something that it was Mekadesh on Friday, and you don't put it onto the Shulchan until Shabbos afternoon. So there will be an issue of Lina. So how do you deal with that? That's the problem with the Rambam.
So then the Rambam essentially is not bothered by the idea of Lena.
Correct. That's why I said
Right.
when you raised the issue at the very beginning and said, I don't understand why should there be an issue of Lena, because after all, this is going to be here all week. I said, well, you're being mechavan to the Rambam. That's exactly why I said that, because the Rambam is effectively saying something along those lines, that the concept of lechem apanim is different from all of the other situations. That the lechem apanim, there is no issue of Lena, and you can have it stay over from Friday night to Shabbos morning.
So
Even though it's Mekadesh on Friday night, because you have to do it you have to do the baking in the Azara, implying that the oven is Mekadesh, the lechem upon him.
And that's the view of Rabbi Yehuda. That's the view of the
No,
rabbis.
it's a view. No, it's a view of the Tanakhama of the rabbis.
But and we said Reb Shimon holds that.
It can be done anywhere because there's no sanctification whatsoever. The sanctification, and it can be done on Friday because the sanctification doesn't happen until you put it on the shulchan. He's very simple. You have to do it on Friday because there's no sanctification that's required. So there's no issue of lina whatsoever because it's not sanctified yet. The sanctification happens when it's on the table. You put it on the table, everything's great. Then that's when it's sanctified. It's all everything's fine, and you can bake it on Friday. According to Rebbe Yehuda, you have to bake it on Shabbos because there is sanctification to the bread, either as soon as you put it into the measuring or as soon as you bake it, whichever one you want to say. Bottom line is that it's sanctified as soon as it's baked. You have to do it on Shabbos. If you didn't do it on Shabbos, there would be an issue of lina. So again, Rabbi Yehuda makes a lot of sense. The Tanakhama somehow fuses these two viewpoints and says you could do the kneading and the shaping outside, but you have to do the baking inside, and yet which would ordinarily suggest that you should therefore violate Shabbos, but he says no, you don't violate Shabbos, and the Rambam paskins that way. So again, that if still
So
not clear,
according
we
to
could
him,
talk about it,
when
God
is
willing, tomorrow.
according to him, Rabbi Yehuda, when is the baking done?
Baking's done on Shabbos, according to Rebbe Yehuda.
But then he would violate Shabbat, right?
Yes, yes, he says that that's not a problem because you need to do it on Shabbos.
And yet, but the Rambam doesn't hold that. It
No, no,
doesn't.
the Rambam, the Rambam says that you don't do it on Shabbos. That's exactly right. The Rambam says you don't do it on Shabbos. That which is, again, the Rambam doesn't hold like either Rebbe Yehuda or Rebbe Shimon. He holds like the Tanakhama, and he
Oh,
holds the two positions that Tosfos said are inconsistent and cannot be held by one person.
right. So he holds that he sort of fuses them in a sense. So
Yes, that's exactly right. He fuses them in a way that appears inconsistent, but could be only explained with something along the lines of what you said, which is that there is no issue. Although you might have thought that there would be an issue of lina, there is no issue of lina with respect to the lechem upon him.
So this, in according to him, the bread is not mikadesh, mukdash until the next
No,
day.
no, it's not clear. It would seem like, according to the Rambam, it is mukdash on Friday when you bake it. Because after all, he says that you have to do the baking inside the Azarah.
Oh,
That's what makes it difficult. That's exactly right.
inside the Azarah, but not inside the.
No, but when the inside the once you're inside the Azarah, that's the safe place for all kudshim.
Okay, so it's not.
Yeah.
So then he brings it, but when it's brought onto the table, that's
Yeah.
inside
That's inside the Kodesh.
the
Correct.
Kodesh. So
Correct.
that it's done outside the Kodesh, but it's inside the Azarah. So
Correct.
he holds you bake that you should bake it there, and it becomes mukdash even
Even on
Friday.
Friday, and yet we don't put it on the shulchan until Shabbos. Yep, that's
So
exactly right.
it is considered mukdash, and we hold the tanur as mukdash outside the Azara, outside the what do you call it? In the Azara, right?
Correct. Correct.
So that's like Rabbi Shimon. You can bake it anywhere.
No, no, he doesn't agree with Rabbi Shimon. He says you have to bake it in the Azara. The two possibilities are either you have to do everything in the is Azara or not Azara. So the point is that Rabbi Shimon says everything can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be in the Azara. Rabbi Yehuda says everything has to be in the Azara. The Tanakhama says the first part, the kneading and the shaping, could be outside the Azara, but the baking has to be inside the Azara. And that's the position that the Rambam takes. The issue is that he says that, and at the same time he says you can't do the baking on Shabbos, which means that you're baking it on Friday. Presumably it's in the Azara in the oven and thereby sanctified on Friday, and
Right.
therefore you should potentially have an issue of lina.
So with Reb Shimon, when he says anywhere, what does it mean at home?
No, no, no. It says base pagi, right? So we saw that Rashi, the last Rashi in the Mishnah, specifically notes that according to Rashi, again, there's a debate as to exactly what base pagi is, but Rashi's interpretation of base pagi is anywhere in Yerushalayim.
Okay, so okay, so it could be in someone's house then, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So he could, yeah, when he says anywhere, it can be, I mean, anywhere in Yerushalayim. It could be, it
Correct.
doesn't have to be
Correct.
in, and then he can bring it there.
Correct. Correct. That's exactly right.
But he also could he also say that it can be done in the Azra or in the kachim itself.
You can even do it in the Azara. That's right. You could do it in the Azara. But the reason that it doesn't raise an issue is because his position is that though the measuring utensil, remember, you have to still use the right measuring utensil. You have to use the Isaron measuring utensil wherever you are. He says that that Isaron measuring utensil does not have any special sanctification and therefore does not sanctify the dough. There is an oven in the Azara, but that oven in the Azara does not actually sanctify its contents.
So it doesn't be, according to Reb Shimon, it doesn't become sanctified until he puts it on the table then, right?
That's exactly right. And that's why it can be done before Shabbos, because he doesn't have a Lena issue. Exactly. All right. I'm going to let
Okay.
you all go. Thank you so much. Looking forward to continuing our learning tomorrow.